I'm Kim Cobb. I'm the director of the Institute at Brown for Environment and Society, and want to thank all of you for waking up early on a very cold day and coming out to kick off the event today. We have the in crowd here, so I'm excited to get us started and get us chatting today on what is the first ever Equitable Climate Futures Conference. So let's give a round of applause for that. That's a big deal. That's a big deal. I really want to thank Provost Doyle for joining us today to provide some comments, and just noting that the Provost Office is our main sponsor for Equitable Climate Futures. So we're grateful for the funding that allowed this to go forward. I also, of course, want to thank Beth Fussell, Baylor Fox-Kemper, and Kara Mitchell, the stalwart Equitable Climate Futures leadership team, for organizing this amazing opportunity. Thank you so much to both of you. Where's Kara? There's Kara, yes. And last but not least, just a quick note of thanks to our incredible IBIS staff that has done so much to market and support the communication efforts for making something like this possible. So let's give them a round of applause, including Jill, who came here very early this morning, wherever you are, Jill. She's out there running around. And I really want to make sure that while most of us here, do we have any community partners who are already in the room today? I know they're joining us at some point, but I really want to make a point of welcoming them today. So when you see a name tag that says something other than Director of IBIS or Brown University, you will know that that's a community partner that was explicitly welcomed into this room today. And part of the goals of today's conference is to, find those people, get to know them, share your work with them, listen to why they came to this and what they want to get out of this day. These are the kinds of structural opportunities that we're trying to engender with this entire initiative. So that's something that you might want to take a special note of. In particular, I wanted to take a moment to thank those community partners who have decided to join us today. And we're going to do several other events in the coming year that's going to feature even more of them, but specifically the Woonasquatucket River Watershed Council, Roots to Empower, Climate Jobs Rhode Island, Warren Health Equity Zone, and Childhood-Led Action Project. So wherever they are, let's give them a round of applause for taking time out of their day to join us. So I could not be more grateful and excited to get to know these individuals, their organizations, and the work that they do, as that is the explicit goal of this entire initiative. The organizers wanted me to talk a little bit about the motivation, origin story of Equitable Climate Futures. And this is something that dates back to way before I ever got to Brown 3 years ago, because Brown has always been a place where this work has thrived. Brown is inherently interdisciplinary because of its structure, because of its curriculum. And when I got here 3 years ago, I looked around and there were already so many amazing projects going on that were deeply partnered with non-academic organizations and entities. And so it was really easy to look around and say, how can we make this bigger, better? How can more people get involved in this work? What are the barriers and what could be the incentives that could bring them together? And so I want to acknowledge a group of, dozens of faculty, many of whom are in this room, who spent time together over many months developing this initiative's proposal. So it really was a groundswell of enthusiasm and effort. And one of the key things we decided was it would be great to have some funding in the form of on-ramps for groups that may want to get started from nothing. And we also wanted to make sure that we had fuel for the cars that were already on the freeway to go further and faster in thinking about the next steps for this work on their way to, at the time, was a huge portfolio of mega grant opportunities that were out there in this space. So we're talking about tens of millions of dollars of grant opportunities in a single call that were, flashing many of us by like this, poof, poof, despite the fact that we've been working in these spaces, many of us for a decade or more. So it takes institutional support, it takes sustained engagement, it takes conversations and crosstalk of the kind that we're having today to really be prepared for some of those calls. Now you're saying, but Kim, yes, there's a but there, but there's another side to the but as well. Obviously, many of those calls have been clawed back, scrapped, excised, vetoed at the highest levels of our government right now. And that is very unfortunate for those of us who really saw this initiative take flight and hoped to land some of those as a direct result of this initiative. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. that. But I think there's a really important but there that makes this initiative incredibly timely and strategic for Brown right now. The first is that this is a long game, right? Climate is going nowhere. And so the idea that this administration would like to thwart this effort is extremely not only short-sighted, but short-lived, because this is going to be something that Brown wants to be in for the duration, having impact, and making sure that the people that want to work on this work have an opportunity to do so, and the partners that want to work with us are sustained and nurtured over the course of not just months and years, but decades, because that's what this is going to take. This is a long-term commitment, and it's a long-term change process that we're looking for. The other really strategic and timely piece of this is that this initiative is providing key funding to some PIs, students, and early career scientists who would not be funded elsewise in this specific environment. So this is providing like much needed oxygen, not just intellectually as a community, but also financially from a resource perspective. And that is extremely important and critical. And I think it is wonderful that we had this in place while this ripples are coming across our community and turning into larger waves. The third thing I wanted to mention is the role of community, which is so important to sustaining this work and to sustaining the energy that it takes to face this challenge on a day-to-day basis as a researcher who's deeply engaged in climate-related work, and to the many community partners that are looking around to what Brown is doing in this moment and how Brown is responding and acting in the face of what is existential level threats to their efforts in climate in this moment as well. So let's remember that community word as we go forward today, as we think about how we're building relationships, how we are moving across our disciplinary silos, how are we envisioning working with partners with the upper administration to make this work sing, not just today, not just next year, but over many years to come. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Frank and wish everybody a lovely conference. And again, the goal from the organizers, step out of your comfort zone is a key thing, but let's do so with an eye towards building a strong community and a strong ecosystem for this very critically important work right now. Thanks to all of you. Frank.
Thank you. I know there's a bunch of faculty here I recognize, but maybe not everybody here I've had a chance to meet. So I'm Frank Doyle. I'm the 14th provost here, also a professor of engineering and of neuroscience, and truly thrilled to be here with you today. My kind of connection is even shorter than Kim's. She said 3-year runway. I've been here 2 years and going on 2.5. And so I got to see the genesis of this in the form of the proposal and the initiative and the review through APC. So delighted to be here at this point. And I also want to call out the faculty directors, Beth would have been right in front of me, and Baylor. Fabulous work that you guys are doing, and delighted to be here. You know, I'll touch on the same word that Kim invoked, interdisciplinarity, collaboration across the disciplines, and community. And I think drilling down a little bit, community both within the campus and reaching across the boundaries, the schools, the disciplines, but crucially, and as Kim and Beth both pointed out, the communities that we're engaging outside of the academy as well are crucial. They must and will help us address the myriad consequences of the climate crisis that we're contending with here. So some of the faculty will know this, may have heard me speak about this, but I identified last spring a handful of top priorities as provost that I wanted to further and resource and support here. And environmental health was one of the handful that I identified as a top priority. And really cutting across many of the themes you'll hear today, including impacts on health and aging, physical hazards to our communities, and kind of in a late-breaking category, I don't know if Timmons is here. I was going to quote something Timmons had in the New York Times. New York Times just this week called, quote, the information war, end quote, in which climate denialism has surged in recent years. Timmons was quoted as saying that's undermining climate action globally. I think it's crucial that we recognize the challenges, as Kim also pointed out, and we couldn't be having this meeting at a more crucial moment in time. I'm proud to say that really in many ways this is the tip of the iceberg in terms of the actions that Brown has been cultivating, the intellectual actions and things going on. And I don't have enough time. If you give me 45 minutes, maybe I could go through a longer list. But I want to give you a couple of just nuggets of some of the other things where, again, I've had the experience of joining and learning and listening. So on the other side of the green, in that general direction, at the Kogut Institute for the Humanities, the Center for Environmental Humanities is deeply engaged in thinking about research and pedagogy on the more than human front of thinking about the unfolding environmental crisis. They have diverse partners, again, across the campus, this notion of community, engaging with the DSI, our Data Science Institute, the Joukowsky Institute for Archaeology in the Ancient World. And the center hosts public events, engaging philosophers, historians, visual artists, all to try to get at broader community building and enabling the scholarship that helps shed light on this challenge. Just down the hill, a little bit further, same direction, the Center for Climate, Environment, and Health was launched at the School of Public Health just last spring. And Beth, you were one of the panelists that was up on the stage, as I recall. I got to participate and listen to that, bringing together faculty from SPH as well as across the wider university, thinking about the downstream effects of climate change on health, whether by measuring the impact of heat domes or preparing vulnerable populations for devastating hurricanes. And I would be remiss in a short list if I didn't include IBIS, since we have the director sitting right in front of me here. I have to say this really exemplifies some of the most powerful work that we have organized and enabled on the campus here. And I'll touch on, again, another convening event. I had the great pleasure in September of meeting dozens of past and present participants in the VOS postdoctoral and fellowship program. They came to campus to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the program, together with alumni, the donors themselves, and the achievements. And I just want to give you a sense of the breadth of activity that this spans. Fields from anthropology, earth, environment, and planetary science, of course, ecology, evolution and organismal biology, engineering, history, public health, sociology, and urban studies, just to name a few. Incredible breadth of fields we need to harness and pull together to tackle a problem of this complexity. So climate change is a subject, like its myriad impacts, that knows no boundaries. And that's why we have to leverage the Brown DNA to work across disciplines, to knock down walls and silos, and then tackle this problem. And that's why the Equitable Climate Future initiative is so compelling. It brings a new dimension to this by focusing on environment and society and considering the impacts on so many domains, on solvable problems. How do we mitigate the effects of and adapt to climate change with actionable scientific evidence? Some of the early signs of success here that I'm sure you'll be hearing about more today. I'm not going to steal too much thunder, but just to call out a couple of the themes. Engineering a just transition for Rhode Island buildings, led by Tom Seguros of Computer Science in the Policy Lab. And I saw Tom here in the audience, there he is, and Stephen Porter, I didn't run into yet, Stephen Porter of Ecology, Evolution, and Organismal Biology and Environment and Society, engaging local stakeholders to develop model policies that ensure an equitable transition away from fossil fuels. We need to work on your metaphor, Kim. You talked about fuel for those cars. We should think about batteries. Second initiative, Breathe Providence, led by Meredith Hastings. Is Meredith here? I saw her, I guess, yesterday at the faculty meeting. She's in Earth, Environment, and Planetary Science, of course, also in Environment and Society. Partnership with the Racial and Environmental Justice Committee is a network of low-cost air monitors in Providence built around the community priorities in order to produce data relevant to residents and policymakers alike. There's the Equitable Climate Information Initiative, led by Mara Freilich. Mara, I met this morning. Also of Earth, Environment, and Planetary Science, creates avenues for community engagement around climate change, including partnerships with Alianza Coachella Valley. Do we have reps from Alianza here, by any chance? I was married in the Coachella Valley. That's why I was hoping to meet somebody from Alianza. And then more locally here in Woonsoquatucket, probably butchered that, the River Watershed Council locally here in Providence. And finally, an initiative on historicizing climate innovations research, led by Aparajita Majumdar. Did I butcher that? Sorry. In both history and environment and society, collaboration among academics, activists, and local community members who resurface forgotten and marginalized stories about how individuals relate to the natural world and the changing climate. And because we're Brown, I can't help but call out research is one of our pillars. The other pillar, of course, is education. We have students here. Looking around the room, raise your hands. Students, excellent. Kim in particular has so impressed me with the statistics of the impact of our environmental studies here at Brown. And I just want to give you a couple of nuggets. I thought you might say this, but I'm going to say it in your behalf. That's a testament to Kim and her leadership. There's over 140 concentrators these days in ENVS and more than 1,500 students who have taken ENVS courses. That's remarkable. Let that sink in for a moment, right? That's basically 1 in 4 students on the campus are coming through the ENVS curriculum. I think that's marvelous. So kind of wrapping up, I have no doubt that the discussions, the conversations you engage in today, whether they're formal, informal, or somewhere in between, will be the foundation and the seed for countless new collaborations, for projects, pulling together our students, our faculty, our staff, and our community members right next door here in Providence, as well as in California and across the globe. Your collaborations will inspire our students and engage and support our communities, and in doing so, accelerate progress towards equitable solutions to the daunting challenges we face. Thank you, and I wish you a very productive day.
Thank you, Frank, and thank you, Kim. And thanks, everyone, for getting here on time and bright and early. And can I invite the first group of panelists up to the podium? I want to just say the goal of our meeting, of our conference today, is to learn about all of the amazing work that is happening at Brown that is interdisciplinary and community engaged and working towards solutions to climate change. And what I hope that we all get out of this today is to meet each other. And so as much as it's important for us to listen to the panels, we're going to spend a lot of time talking to each other as well. There'll be plenty of time for Q&A. So please do feel engaged and empowered to ask questions during the Q&A period. I'm going to invite Baylor, the moderator, to come up to the podium and begin the first panel. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. So I'm Baylor Fox-Kemper. I'm one of the faculty co-directors of the ECF, and I'm the moderator for this first panel, which is on climate hazards and resilience. I welcome you all as you're coming in. We have some other introductions and things to do, but actually I'm going to wait until we get, this is an introduction to have people have better conversations during the posters, so I'm going to wait until we get a little closer to the posters, and maybe there'll be some more folks by that point. But our goal this morning is to hear a little bit about some of the work in finding about, so a climate hazard is one part of the problem, and we know that climate change is changing the level of hazards as we go on. Some things, heat waves, wildfires, flooding, and so on, are getting more and more common. The topic of this morning's panel is to talk about some of the work that goes toward identifying those hazards, but also how those hazards relate to the resilience of communities around the country. So that's our goal, and we will be starting out. Our first panelist is Emanuele di Lorenzo. And Emanu, why don't you tell us a little bit about the work that you do on climate hazards and how it relates to resilience?
Sure. So I'm Manu. First, I want to say I'm an Italian, and I'm an oceanographer. So I study the ocean circulation, ocean dynamics, ocean and climate. But once I moved here to Brown, I was really interested in trying to understand how ocean climate impacted coastal communities. And so with sort of cold phone calls around the state early and then some calls around New England, we brought together about 49 researchers in New England that span both the social and natural sciences, as long as some practitioner. And we started this very ambitious project called the Community-Driven Coastal Climate Research and Solution, or 3CRS Hub. And that alone is a mouthful of words. And it took us, I think, the first year to understand what it means to do community-driven research. But in general, this project, as I said, is really trying to basically bring together knowledge, tools, and partnership and collaboration to really develop sort of strategies for waterfront communities in New England to really deal with coastal resilience and climate. In particular, our project focuses on 4 focal communities along New England, just as a way to sort of practice how we can do this kind of science. 2 of them are here in Rhode Island. It's the Port of Providence and the Port of Galilee, and 2 are in Maine. One is Rockland, Maine, and Bath, Maine. Our goals are listed here. You can see, you can read them from the slide. We're trying to first understand what are gaps in knowledge and tools that are identified by the communities. We're trying to co-produce with them data set, modeling tools, and other metrics that track dynamically over time how resilience is changing, both in the health domain. We have here Kate Moretti, who's part of the team, and also in some of the resilient population dynamics with Beth here. And moving forward, really all this is really to try to support decision-making and more importantly, also amplify these community narratives. So when you walk in a community, you'll find that there are powerful stories of how community have dealt with climate over the course of their history. And you really need to understand those narratives in order to really build the future with them and start designing new things. So with that said, there's one thing that I wanted to highlight as part of our work. We're also developing a network of sensors that are very local, like at the scale where people live, that include things like flooding, heat, and air quality. And this network of sensors is really to allow communities to collect their own data, have real-time access to what's going on. And in addition to being a science tool, it's also a great engagement tool. It's something very concrete that the people can see. The students can get involved in building the sensors down the road. And so we're very proud of that. And this is a map that shows the current display of flood sensors around the state. Not all of them have been deployed by our project. A lot of them are also pre-existing. But this is just a plug-in, and I'm probably going to stop there. Thank you.
And so our next panelist is Mara Freilich, who is going to tell us a little bit about her project. She's one of the leaders of one of our working groups. A lot of the talks and panelists we'll be hearing today are representing working groups that are one of the first funding initiatives from the ECF.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so Mara Freilich, I'm an assistant professor in Earth, Environmental, and Planetary Sciences and Applied Math here at Brown. And so the work that I'm going to talk about is a collaboration that we call the Salton Sea Environmental Time Series. It's based in the Salton Sea, which is the largest lake in California. It's located between Los Angeles and Joshua Tree, approximately, so in Southern California. It's a large agricultural area. It's near where you see the Coachella Festival, right? These very wealthy areas. But this is a low-income agricultural community. The project really started out with community engagement. So a nonprofit organization, Alianza Coachella Valley, was looking for scientists to help with water quality monitoring. And that was because the state and federal governments had both stopped water quality monitoring in the Salton Sea in 2020. It's the largest lake in California, heavily polluted. And so the community is saying that we need to continue this. And I think that implementing this community science project really ended up being transformative for the role of community in handling not only the regulation around water quality in the moment, but also in engaging with past data. Because community was collecting their own data, bringing it to the water board and saying, you're not collecting data, but we are. And so this filled a gap in monitoring. We produced a number of products, right? So one was a cohort of engaged residents who were doing water quality monitoring, coming out once a month, both collecting data, analyzing data, but then through that, really defining new research questions, right? So our products from this have included peer-reviewed publications, but also reports and workshops, engagement with community. What I think we didn't anticipate initially from a project like this, where we're saying we have this very clear goal, we're going to monitor this lake, see what the conditions are, how they change over time, was that there would be new scientific questions that would emerge from this. And so when we were doing these workshops with the community, we kept getting the question, how does this water quality, you're talking about water quality, how does that affect health? And I think there were very clear signs that water quality was affecting air quality in the area, and as a consequence, it was affecting health. And so what you see on this slide is a photo, right? So the first photo at the top, that's our community science cohort. This is a nice picture taken by a photojournalist who came out. We're on the beach, right, analyzing data. I'll highlight Aide Palomino in the green jacket, organizer with Alianza Coachella Valley, who's been really critical to convening this. On the right-hand side, you'll see Cruz Marquez and then Alejandro Lopez, who's in the back of the room, installing a hydrogen sulfide monitor on a post in the middle of the Salton Sea. And below that, you see data that we've gotten from this, right? So the state government knew that there were hydrogen sulfide emissions coming from the Salton Sea. In orange, you see a regulatory sensor, and that's ours. That regulatory sensor said that hydrogen sulfide exceeded the state standard. In green is the sensor that we installed, the sensor you see Alejandra next to, showing that there is dramatically more exceedances of the state air quality standard than the regulatory sensors were suggesting. And so this led to questions, and there really is debate in scientific literature and among management in this lake of, will the hydrogen sulfide emissions continue to increase, or will they decrease over time? And this is all in the context really of a climate-driven trend of drying in the West. All of the water, nearly all of the water in the Salton Sea comes from the Colorado River. And so the water availability in the Salton Sea really is driven by human management decisions in a climate-driven changes in water availability. And so we've been able to address both some of these fundamental scientific questions while also changing narrative and ways that community are engaging in scientific decision-making.
Thank you, Mara. Chris is our next panelist. Please, Chris, introduce your project.
Hey, y'all. So I'm Chris Horvat. I'm also an assistant professor here in EAPS. And I think most of my research output and background is in polar oceanography. So I work a lot on understanding the relationship between the ocean and polar regions like the Arctic and Antarctica. But I came to Brown last year after several years as a professor in New Zealand and worked a lot in the South Pacific. And so I now lead, because of research that started there with community organizations in New Zealand and throughout the Pacific, a group called Empiric, which is a multinational collaboration with us, the World Health Organization, elements of the UN, the South Pacific Commission, and now CARICOM, which is a governance body for the Caribbean. And the general problem is what you can see in this plot here. So that black outline is the base map or the geographic map of the Solomon Islands. Solomon Islands are this archipelago of nearly 1,000 individual islands. And if you're interested in the future of climate in these small island developing states, you really want to have climate projections that accurately resolve these islands and their topography and their impact in the climate system. Around this, scattered in these blue boxes, are some of what are called high-resolution downscaled climate projections in this area. So it is a fact that if you are in a Pacific island or a Caribbean island or block island, the projections that are provided to you, say, by the United Nations or the World Health Organizations that you are supposed to use to make decisions about infrastructure siting or human health risk are guided by models that don't see where you are. And therefore, elements of the physics of these small island states need to be incorporated into future projections. So that's what Empiric is. So it brings together health practitioners, public health officials throughout the Pacific and now Caribbean to actually build new machine learning models that leverage information that's available in very highly resolved communities or areas like the Hawaiian Islands or Guam, the US and Europe, and transfers this information to small island states outside of the relatively well-resolved places. And so that has been ongoing for a couple of years. We have some really nice, ongoing work here at Brown, sponsored in part by some of the efforts through ECF and other organizations. And yeah, just happy to discuss that kind of thing.
Great, thank you, Chris. And introducing our final panelist, Salim. Please talk a little bit about your project.
Sure. I'm Slim Sooner. The provost mentioned the DNA of Brown. I think no one exemplifies that better than I. I came to Brown in 1982 as an undergraduate and, finished engineering, got my graduate degree, went to medical school, did my residency, did my fellowship, all at Brown. So, I bleed brown. I'm a professor of engineering, surgery, and emergency medicine. May sound like three disparate fields. And what am I doing here is a good question. So as an emergency physician, we see the end results of extremes of climate, the impact on the human body with heat-related illness, hypothermia, and a multitude of other health consequences of climate change. And we're seeing it more often, and I envision we're going to see it even more as time passes on. What I want to talk about today is a specific consequence of climate change, and that is increasing heat waves and the health consequences of that related to heat stroke, which is a condition where the body's ability to dissipate heat is impaired, and heat builds up in the body and causes often irreparable damage and death. And there are two populations that this condition affects. One of them is young, healthy athletes, exertional heat stroke. And we partnered with the Corey Stringer Foundation, which studies heat stroke in athletes. And we're embarking on a research project to treat heat stroke. The important thing about treating heat stroke, and it's not rocket science, you just dunk them in a cold bath, ice water bath, but this has to be done quickly. If it's not done quickly, the brain gets injured, the cardiovascular system gets injured, there's multi-organ failure. And to do that is sometimes, you think it'd be easy, right? It is difficult because, for example, in exertional heat stroke, the athletes are running a marathon or in the field, and there's no ice, and there's little knowledge in the pre-hospital community of this treatment. So we're partnering with some vendors that have developed novel technologies. For example, a cooling vest that's activated by water, which is easy to get everywhere, and can cool the body temperature very quickly on the way to the hospital, where we can provide definitive treatment. We're envisioning studying this in an area where heat stroke is very prevalent, and that is the Hajj, which brings millions of people together in a hot climate. And there are dozens and hundreds of cases of heat stroke in a very short period of time. So this is a good laboratory to study this phenomenon. We also partner with our community partners, EMS agencies, the Providence Emergency Management Agency, for example, in education of pre-hospital personnel, athletic trainers, on the importance of rapid treatment. The other population that heat stroke affects is the elderly and those on some medications. And often this effect is disproportionate in lower income communities because of lack of air conditioning, poor health in general. So, this project can also be translated into those communities. At the same time, I run the emergency preparedness in Brown University Health, and we're always preparing for consequences of climate change, such as increasing hurricanes, floods. That's another effort that I'm involved in. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Sam. So that's the basic description of what things, why our panelists are here. But I actually want to move on to the next question, which is a little more targeted, which is, so all of us are, basic scientists, climate scientists, engineering scientists, practitioners. But what really drew you to a community engaged or sort of downscaling style of work in terms of bringing basic science approaches into more direct impacts toward resilience? And, a little bit about like why this work is different from the kind of work that we might take on under other kinds of projects that were more from the basic sciences. So first, I'll ask if anyone has an immediate response, but if not, we can continue back in the same order. Go ahead, Manu, then.
Well, that was a long question. First of all, why did I start this work on coastal resilience? I think, since I was a graduate student, my projects were related to coastal modeling. So I did some coastal models, and we did some coastal forecasts, and I had this really great vision that my work would be so important. Who would not look at my forecast now that I have it? And so in my first position as a baby professor in Georgia, I started working with some of the coastal Georgia communities, and I thought, hey, if this models, I can really do good. It turns out nobody cared, and this nobody cared is something that continues to echo through, my work as we try to understand in which way our research can really have an impact. We have a very kind of conceived notion, oh, this must be important. But ultimately, the translation of research into something that is really useful and impactful is very hard. And I would say there are very few examples when it comes to coastal resilience where researchers are really, truly co-producing that knowledge, those tools, so in a way that really communities are really feel engaged and feel like, okay, this is something that we really need and it's changing our lives. And I think the challenge is two-way. One is that we grew up in silos, and so is the communities. And so for the communities themselves, they think they have it all under control. And we grew up in silos. We think we know what they need. And so the question is, how can we sort of cross-fertilize each other? And so at one sense, there's also some learning that has to happen, some exposure. And so I think that's been one challenging aspect of doing research that is applied, in my case, to coastal community resilience. So that was the first question. The second one was?
Just how does this differ from the other kinds of work you do?
Why don't we pass it on, because it's...
That's good.
Yeah.
I think it's fine.
Yeah.
Sorry, I made that one a little more complicated than I needed to. Maura, please.
Sure. So a lot of the work I do is quite interdisciplinary. I guess I just said at the beginning, much of my research has to do with oceanography, looking at physical oceanography, and also how does physics of the ocean affect marine ecosystems, right? And in doing that, I collaborate a lot with people who have expertise that is distinct from my own. And I think in doing this community engaged research, it comes from a quite similar perspective. I will do better work if I'm working with people who have expertise in the area that they are talking about. It will make the science better. It will advance knowledge it will advance knowledge more than if I were just working in isolation from my own narrow disciplinary perspective. And so in doing this work, I think that was really one of the drivers of saying that I need to work with people who have expertise in the area. They're going to help us define the right questions. And by being involved throughout the process of the research, they are also going to help ensure that the research has the impact that Manu was just talking about, right? That we continue to do this in the right way. I think there was also a broader way we talk about Brown has this mission of doing good in the world, right? Of mobilizing knowledge to make a difference, right? And I think one of the things that was really insightful for me about doing this work was that Brown has an educational mission. We do this through educating people. We were able to do that through the community science work in particular, right? Teach people new scientific methods, scientific techniques, bring people into careers, graduate education who otherwise might not do that or might see that this program is a critical transition point. But the community organizations also have their own missions that involve doing good in the world, not necessarily through education or publishing papers or reports, but through mobilizing knowledge in other ways, right? Showing up at panels, showing up in workshops, bringing people together. And so I think that is why, right? Just saying that we can really expand the scope of tools available to us and perspectives available and do better science.
Great, thanks, Mara. Chris?
Sure. Yeah, so I guess I would say that the work that I've been focusing on, particularly with communities in small island states, is very different from what I would say my day job was, which was building models of sea ice for polar oceans. It was a big transition that happened over the last several years, but now I would say that that is what I do most of the time, is work on these ML tasks for small island states, and most of my group is focusing on that now. I think one of the reasons I got into climate science, I always thought I was going to be a pure mathematician, and then I realized, no offense to the mathematicians, Brad, or the physicists in the room, sorry to call you out, but I felt like I really wanted to do something that interacted with people and had an impact in communities that were facing the risk of climate change and related extremes. And so when I was in New Zealand, I mean, this was a big focus of the funding bodies in New Zealand and also the research enterprise there, which is to actually have an impact on populations within New Zealand and around the Pacific. And this was something that I really enjoyed getting to first participate in, and somebody sent me a white paper once that said, we're looking for climate scientists who can help us understand climate data in small island states. Can you find somebody who might be willing to do this? And I did not find anyone else. I found myself. And I've really enjoyed working with community partners, particularly in Fiji and now in Trinidad, but also, yeah, Fiji's a better place to do field work than the high Arctic, and I'll leave it at that.
A very pragmatic result there. Salam, please.
The reason why I'm doing the work I'm doing is because heat stroke is preventable. Death from heat stroke is very preventable, especially in the exertional heat stroke in the athletes. And when I see people come into the emergency department with heat stroke that have not been treated in a timely manner, a young life lost, that's what drives me in this work. And it's also preventable, especially in the other type of heat stroke where air conditioning, for example, is one simple method, but a lot of households don't have it, and those populations suffer and will continue to, especially with increasing number of heat waves that we're seeing.
Great. So, all right. Let me try and make it a little simpler this time instead of confusing things. So now it's time to talk about some greatest hits. I think, what are some examples of things that you have found that through this work that's really improved the resilience of the communities you're working with? And, did you identify those in collaboration with the communities, or was it something that you had identified beforehand?
That's a tough question. I would say that for me, the greatest. Let me just back out 1 second. So I started my coastal resilience work in Georgia, where I've been for a longer period than here at Brown. And I think what was really important there was we went in the community with the idea that we have a novel technology that was going to solve sea level rise for that community. And so we arrived with a whole bunch of sensors and said, oh, we're going to monitor sea level rise and stuff. And what we realized later that was really important was that really that was just a way to start a conversation. And that conversation began, and really the sensors became less important. And what became important was really the relationship we started building. And by the time this project had evolved, those sort of technology research that we were hoping to do is still there, but it was really just sort of the foundation for bringing different communities, high schools, together to work on the concept of building together a more resilient future. And by the time I left Georgia, that project transforms from being one where we were focused more on the technology of science, which was, building models, building tools, building, plans, to one where now there's a resilience hub in Georgia that is really mostly a community organization where all the resilience issues are being discussed, openly with trust among both the communities, and the scientists are part of that. And so that actually is really sort of the ideal of what I think is, working with these communities. Anyway, yeah, I'll share that.
Yeah, so I think one of the things in working in the Salton Sea is that in collaboration with Alianza, we have been able to formulate our research in ways that has direct policy relevance. It's a really complicated environment. As we said, we're looking at the intersection of air quality and water quality. I think that's a really important role for academics to take because it's something that falls in gaps between agencies. There's a water board and there's an air board. Water board says that they're not responsible for anything that goes into the air. The air board says that they're not responsible for what's coming out of the water, right? And in some ways, it is not within their mandate. They have a lot of other stuff to do. And so I want to give two examples of impact that we've been able to have. So one is that the community was involved, as I said, in defining this question. How is the water quality impacting the air quality? Said hydrogen sulfide's a really clear indicator that the water quality is affecting the air quality. We installed the hydrogen sulfide sensor. We published a study just this year on the impact of the lake on hydrogen sulfide, really documenting this, showing some of the data and explaining some of the data that was coming out of our sensors. We got media coverage of that sort of intentionally, and with Alianza leading in the media aspect of it, really leading the narrative of what are we saying about this to the public. As a result of that, and community consistently showing up to the air board installed an additional regulatory sensor in communities where they had previously said they didn't have evidence that there would be impacts of hydrogen sulfide. So one of the communities who we worked with very closely, the North Shore community. Right, so they installed a new sensor. In terms of the water board, we had community members consistently show up to water board meetings. But this past summer, we held workshops with community reporting on some of our results. These workshops were funded by an IVAS seed grant after grant termination. Reporting on some of the results, defining the questions, talking about what we're continuing to do. And the state water board decided to show up to those workshops. And in showing up to those workshops, they commented to us, they said, wow, like this community is really well informed, has really clear ideas about what needs to happen. And I think in talking about this, I want to push back on the word resilience in some way, in this context in particular, right? I think in many contexts, we say resilience is about supporting a status quo. In this context, the status quo is untenable, right? No matter what, the projection is that the Salton Sea will not exist in 20 years, right? So, and the question is just how that happens and what happens to the communities living on the shores, right? It's not guaranteed, I should say, that there will be no water going to the Salton Sea and that it won't exist at all, but we're in an area where it is going to change, and it is going to change quite rapidly. And so these conversations are really about what happens. And so the other story that I want to talk about, I talked about the Colorado River as being the source of water, right? So Colorado River, There's a plan that ends in 2026, right? So quite soon. States are currently renegotiating Colorado River allocations, though that has huge stakes for the Salton Sea. They released an interim environmental assessment, a short-term plan, and that short-term plan said that there would be no economic impacts to communities surrounding the Salton Sea of reductions in water supply to the area, right? And that's just not true, right? It meant that farm workers were going to be furloughed for summer months, which are the hottest months when people need to be paying the most for air conditioning. It gets above 100 degrees regularly in this area, right? And so that from quick conversations with community, you can say that that is not true, right? And so we were able to, really leveraging our data, saying we have the scientific expertise, but also the relationships with community to submit public comments. And those public comments got attention of Bureau of Reclamation, who then invited us to submit much longer comments for their interim report in advance of publication of that to optimize the chances that the knowledge and expertise that we have been developing from both a scientific perspective, but also from the community perspective, could be included. In doing so, we realized we should bring in economists as well to help us document some of that.
Great, thanks, Mara. Chris, greatest hits?
Yeah, greatest hits. Those of you who have worked in global aid or global health might know that they're not always hits when it comes to climate change. There are just revealing of failures or past failures. That slide I showed you about the Solomon Islands, the United Nations provided information about the Solomons and sea level rise impacts to the Minister for Health and to the Climate Change Minister of the Solomons, who then presented them to a workshop that our group was in attendance at, and it's a single value for those 1,000 islands. So we have been yelling, along with the partners of ours in SPC, which is the South Pacific Community, about all of this lack of sort of communication between folks who actually need information and folks who provide information. And I think this has been very clearly revealed. I am guilty of writing a report with a group of public health officials throughout the Pacific that showed that various hospitals in the South Pacific were at risk of flooding events and rainfall. And then we did a number of site visits to community hospitals or larger hospitals, tertiary care facilities throughout the Pacific, and found that many of the ones we said were at risk were definitely not at risk, and many of the ones we said were not at risk because they were on an elevated plain or something were actually flooding every time it rained. So I think what we've learned over this 5-year collaboration so far is that there's a lot of information that's being passed from the local areas up some sort of aid chain or something, or into the governmental, organizations, and is not actually reflecting the information on the ground. And there's different, there's aid organizations who are essentially funding some of this redevelopment, like the UN Loss and Damage Fund, and those folks are not very well connected to people that are actually in the small island states that they are then championing in their reports, even though they don't actually have local scale information. So that's our challenge. We've definitely, hopefully, revealed that. I think there's good groundswell. Ralph Reagan-Vanu successfully was able to win a case at the International Court of Justice saying that the essentially global north is responsible for the climate change impacts financially in small island states, particularly in the Pacific. So that was a big win for Vanuatu. And that's progress. We weren't involved in that, but it is some progress towards some sort of justice for small island states. So.
Great. And to them?
Greatest hits, 2 stories. Related to heat stroke, there was an incident in Providence several years ago where a young athlete died from heat stroke during a marathon. There were some gaps in preparedness and treatment. We mobilized our expertise and worked with partners both in the emergency medical services arena, changed some of the protocols for EMS in responding to heat stroke, particularly, cool them before you transport them. And also worked with many agencies across the state to have better communication with the hospitals. We didn't even know there was a marathon that day in the Level 1 Trauma Center where I work And if we had, we could be better prepared. We could bring large quantities of ice to the emergency department and shave off a few minutes of time where if we didn't know that, we'd have to go looking for ice. Things like that. So now there's much better communication between agencies. We're notified of large events like marathons or gatherings outdoors, and actually diving deeper into those, we get the medical plans for those events in real time and can have input into that. This work required a lot of legwork and education. One of my partners, Corin Canadian, along with the disaster medicine fellows, that's another thing I do is I train emergency medicine graduates in disaster medicine and emergency preparedness. So we mobilized all those teams, and I did some community outreach and meetings with agencies, and now the state of Rhode Island is in a much better place to prevent and treat heat stroke, exertional heat stroke. The second story is, if anybody has read the book 5 Days at Memorial, which describes what happens in a hospital after Hurricane Katrina, a hospital that did not have great disaster preparedness efforts, will understand that a power outage, for example, is a death blow to hospitals that are not prepared. And increasing heat waves, use of energy in the summertime leads to power outages. And hospitals need to be prepared for this. So we work continuously in shoring up our preparedness for this. And we've had several power outages. And due to that work, we were able to mitigate the health consequences of those outages.
Great. So a lot of successes there. So at this point, we're going to switch over to having some questions from the audience. I'm going to run over and grab the microphone over there while everyone gets their ideas ready. There's also a microphone in the back, but if you have an idea, please raise your hand or come over to one of the microphones and we'll take some questions.
Thank you, everyone. These are really interesting comments. It's great to hear all of your diverse experiences. And I want to just, some of the things that struck me in the last round of questions were about what your success stories were, or maybe, the lessons learned from the failures, is how there were a lot of intermediaries between you all as scientists or medical professional, and then the way in which some sort of policy action or response was ultimately implemented. So, in other words, there are community partners who engage you in this research, and there's you, the scientists. Who are the other actors who need to be at the table in order to make the connections between what scientific lessons or information we have and actually changing some kind of practice? And this could be to any of you.
Sure, I can start. I can scream till I'm blue in the face when EMS brings a patient that was not cooled, for example, in heat stroke, and it doesn't change anything. But if I engage the policymakers and the groups that write the EMS protocols and change those protocols, then that is a positive change. So those players have to be engaged continuously, and the best way to do that is presenting data. We know the treatment; it's easy. Here's how we can change the protocols to make that happen. For example, I work with another emergency physician who actually trained at Brown, who's the medical director of the Corey Stringer Foundation, and he is the medical director of the Falmouth Road Race, which again happens in summer when it's really hot, and for some reason is a generator of exertional heat stroke. There are 20 to 30 cases each year. And since he took over the medical care for that race, there has been very few hospitalizations. They treat the heat stroke in the field, and many of them get discharged home from the field. And he's, written papers on this, so we can present that data and make changes in policy. In this case, changing the pre-hospital protocols and guidelines.
Mara?
I can add, I think two things. So one, I don't think I've given enough credit to the work that the community partners do. We community partners who are, when we had a large grant together, they were devoting 20 to 50% FTE to the project, right? And so they were putting a substantial amount of work into all aspects of the work, but I mean, I think they were actually doing more than they were being paid to do, right? In terms of like convening workshops, getting people to show up, communicating the results, doing a lot of that community organizing work. Alianza is somewhat unique in that it's a partnership organization, and I think that's revealing in that when we say community partner, we mean many different things. So Alianza is a partnership, campaign-driven organization. They have some grassroots partners, particularly in this case, Líderes Campesinas, a women's farm worker organization. And so they're more grassroots, like work with large numbers of people. There's more policy-focused partners, like the Sierra Club, for example. We work a lot value like the Pacific Institute, a more think tank who have these deep policy expertise, particularly around Colorado River negotiations. And so we need lots of different types of non-academic organizations or people with non-academic expertise to make this impact. The other thing in a story I talked about, the agencies are the ones that are going to make changes. And so there are two ways or more that we've worked with the agencies. One is that many of these agencies have advisory boards, and even California's Colorado River negotiations have advisory boards that do include residents and community members. And so part of what we've been able to do is support residents, community members and community leaders to be on those boards and help prepare them with information, background research that they need to really serve those roles well, right? Those are usually uncompensated roles that do require quite a lot of work to do well. And then the other is serving as scientists. So I'm now on the science committee of the Salt and Sea Management Program, another uncompensated role. But traditionally, the scientific perspective, both in the Colorado River and in Salt and Sea Management, has been focused more on natural environment, and so in Salt and Sea in particular, focused on Salt and Sea as a bird habitat. And so I think the type of work we're doing around community engagement allows even just that technical scientific expertise where we are talking about, right, like what pollutants, what contaminants are there, what is going to be the trajectory in the future, and how will different management projects affect these pollutants and contaminants, really bring in the perspective of how will that affect human communities, right? And so continuing to have scientists in the same role in those advisory boards, but ultimately saying that it's going to be the agencies and managers. You mentioned the federal government as well, right? Federal government's become a less reliable partner and actor in this, but they remain important as the ultimate decision maker and funder of many of these programs.
Can I make a... of course, any work you're doing with communities is different. So in the context of working with community and the coast and resilience, to me, one missing actor for a long while has been businesses. And let me explain why. There's this, when you work with the community on the coast, you may think that climate is an important challenge, or flooding or heating, but the reality is these communities are really struggling with their own well-being. And that well-being has many, many dimensions. And one important dimension is really the financial well-being. And so in some sense, if you really want to improve the resilience of these communities, you have to sort of think of it not just as a solution that is technical, but really it has to be also an economic solution of some sort, something that really gives them a prospect, a future. And so in that sense, it's really important to engage also businesses in constructing that vision for a better well-being so that you can actually develop an economy of resilience or solutions for these coastal communities. There's been for a long while this idea that when it comes to these coastal communities, the government, the state government, or any other sort of federal entity has to sort of pay in to support their well-being and their resilience, but that's probably not a model that will scale. And so we have to figure out how to integrate also businesses and economies to really advance that sort of solution. So that's my 2 cents.
Great, thanks, Manu. I think we have a question over here next.
Hi, everyone. I just had a quick comment. I'm Claire DeSarbo. I'm the director of Providence Emergency Management Agency. I was activated on the very bad day that Dr. Sooner was talking about with the marathon and the extreme heat mass casualty incident. So just to talk a little bit about how do you get that into policy, into protocol, we have, in collaboration with Dr. Sooner's team and Corin at Rhode Island Hospital, completely revamped how we permit and manage major events in the city. And I think one of the big pieces of that is identifying who has the authority to be making those policy changes, who has the authority having jurisdiction, who can actually make those changes. And in some cases, it's like me, right? So I have mandated, because I have the authority to veto permitting for major events in the city. And we have completely changed how we monitor and how we manage large-scale events, particularly with weather concerns and with heat concerns. In collaboration and with the subject matter expertise and weigh-in of the doctors on Dr. Sooner's team and with the subject matter experts. So I am not a subject matter on extreme heat. I know the basic EMS field protocols, but what we are doing is taking the medical guidance and scientific guidance from the doctors who are SMEs on this and implementing that in our protocols and how we kind of action that in the street. And we've changed that, and that was what, 3 years ago that the young man died. And we've changed how we manage that in the city, how events are permitted. We have changed a lot of things on that. Unfortunately, the young man shouldn't have died. That was a really grave mistake on multiple parts, but we've overhauled everything. So I think just to your point about how do you translate the science into the street is finding partners and who has the authority. Sometimes it's a government agency, sometimes it is non-governmental, but who has the authority to actually make that decision? And like, I can stop events. That event runner is never running an event in the city again, period. Like, we've changed things and that mistake will hopefully never happen again. We'll make other mistakes, but we do try to learn and be guided by the science.
And if I may add to that, we're very lucky in Rhode Island. It's a small state that we, have FaceTime with these policymakers, and it's usually the same players. I've been here a long time, as I alluded to earlier, and we're lucky that we have that kind of connection. Which other states, it would be very difficult to negotiate those barriers.
Absolutely, thanks. I think we have another question over here.
Yes, thanks so much. Okay, I wasn't sure if my mic was on. So this is a question there are like 2 parts. One for the assistant professors on the panel, and then one for everyone else. So in a lot of instances, community engaged work at research institutions is not necessarily valued or rewarded in the same way as peer-reviewed publications are for the tenure clock and other forms of professional development. And so I'm curious if you guys can just speak to that experience that you've had or any challenges. Obviously not trying to throw Brown under the bus, but more just sort of talking about how you think about community engaged work versus the other work you have to do in your professional trajectory. And then for kind of the entire panel, I'm interested to hear how you would want to see community engaged work more institutionally supported, either at Brown or kind of at a higher level. So thank you.
Mara and Chris.
Yeah, okay, that's a good point.
Can I answer for Mara with a joke? She's so productive that she can spare also community engagement.
What Chris just mentioned to me was that Brown has a community engaged research pilot program that's being led by the Swearer Center to help departments think through how they're supporting community engaged work. And so I think a genuine part of the answer is that I really appreciate being at Brown and the institutional support that there is for community engagement and the thoughtfulness in thinking through, right? It's not institutionalized in tenure and promotion criterion either by departments, but that the conversation is live here about what that means and that we have large-scale initiatives like Equitable Climate Futures that are providing the resources, both like intellectually, structurally, and financially to pull it off. I think part of the answer, though, is that it has really helped to be able to work with community partners in ways that they are fully resourced to do their work. So I'm not both an assistant professor and a community organizer in terms of convening workshops, that the community organizers are able to be community organizers, do that aspect of the work, and I can be a scientist. And in my greatest hit, as Baylor called it, I tried to highlight that peer-reviewed publication was critical in bringing community voice to the table and in making some of that. And so I don't think we do a lot that is not peer-reviewed publication. That's a lot of work that goes beyond that, but we are still publishing peer-reviewed work, and that is why I see it as part of the work that I do as faculty at Brown. The other part that I mentioned was that we do educational work as well. And that was really critical, right? We had this really successful community science program. It was bringing a super engaged, excellent cohort of residents out into the field, like really hot days, early mornings, all day on the sand, and keep showing up and keep engaging, right, with really excellent ideas about what to do. But we got to a moment when sort of the initial funding ran out of, are we going to keep doing this? And in those conversations of, are we going to keep doing this? Alianza, the nonprofit organization, said this is not part of our mission. Like, we don't run workforce development programs like this, or what you're citing as many of the successes is not what we do. But then the realization, right, that's what I do, right? That's what Brown does as an educational institution. We have it in our mission, doing these sorts of educational programs. And so I think realizing and articulating the ways that this is part of the mission of Brown, and it is part of the job that I've been hired to do here, has helped. And it's also helped to make the community partnership stronger, to realize that, yes, Brown can fund and resource those sort of workforce development aspects. We will do that through applying to grants, and that the community organization could then focus on their campaign goals and their advocacy work as well. Because they were having similar questions, right? Like, this work is outside of what we do and outside of our mission.
Yeah, I concur with almost everything. Well, everything that Mara just said. I think, yeah, there are fundamental science questions that remain to be answered that we are tackling at the same time that the information we're providing is hopefully being useful to policymakers and stakeholders and people making decisions in small island states. So I don't see this as antithetical to some of the things that we're tasked with at Brown. I think it's, it's synergistic, I guess. It's very supportive of the mission here and supportive of my mission. And I agree.
Comment on the broader question from Manu Salam?
I have a second
Yeah,
question,
second question.
for the other
Yeah.
group. Sorry.
Yeah, the question for everyone was how you would want to see community engaged work be more supported, either at an institutional level, for example, thinking about how to integrate community engaged work into people's tenure clocks or other forms of evaluation that go on, or from a broader, like cross-state level of just catalyzing more community engaged work across Rhode Island or the region. Would you want that to look like?
Okay, I'll throw one in there. First, I think that the experience that I've had with the communities in Rhode Island has been that they're bombarded with different groups trying to work with them. And so at the very least, I think that this is not just a challenge that Brown has to face alone, but we do need to create some sort of network and understanding with other research institutions that are doing community engaged work in the state to really operate as a team. And I think historically, Rhode Island, with their university, has had challenge in working as a team. And so, I would say my strongest sort of contribution has been to really try to develop that trust with some of the other institutions here in Rhode Island, like URI, Roger Williams, or even Rick, to sort of make sure that we find a way to work as a team, to develop these tools, to take equal credit, and at the same time, work with these communities in ways that they can respond within their bandwidth. I will stop there, let other ones respond, but I have some other ideas when it comes to the internal tenure clock you mentioned.
Yeah, I would just add that a word that Manu mentioned is trust. I think there does need to be some recognition that trust takes time, especially with, like, we keep using community partners as an example, but I mean, I was a white dude from the United States who lived in New Zealand, who would just show up to Fiji all the time. And I am not exactly the first person that folks in the Pacific would want to work with, because my local knowledge was limited and my exposure to the risks that I was, talking about my scientific expertise in was limited. So building trust with community organizations takes a very long time and requires patience on the part of the people pushing us to get funding or, write papers or whatever. So I think that's a place where recognizing the time challenge associated with community research and how we build that trust with our partners long term to actually make meaningful impacts. It can be written in review statements and things like that, I suppose, structurally, but yeah.
And Salim, you seem to have something else?
Yeah, I want to build on that. And a good way of doing that is to invite the community partners into your world and also step into their world and, spend a day with them and have them spend a day with you and see what your day is like and also experience what their day is like. And there's no better way of building that trust doing that. And that does require time and effort, and oftentimes that time and effort is not recognized in academic currency or other remuneration.
Great. We have another question back here. Yes.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Maria Jose. I work for Woonasquatucket River Watershed Council, like co-facilitator. I'm studying English, so be patient with me, please. And I think our organization, I said our because I'm with Jenny. She's co-facilitator too in community action programs. And all those subjects are interesting for us. And I think about the best, how we can create a partnership with you, because we work directly with the community, Hispanic community. And my question is, the best can be utilized in Resilience Hub with the community people and training them for use it in the community. And next year too is a soccer World Cup in United States. And we have a lot of match in Boston, so we can prepare the community people too for be, I don't know, volunteers or work and help to this olas de calor. How do you say that?
Heat weights.
Heat waves. Thank you.
Those are excellent points. Thank you for that question. So yeah, I view the vest as sort of like this automatic external defibrillator that you see all over the state in public gathering areas, in airports, in restaurants. And it's much easier to use. All you have to do is put water in it and put it on the person. And partnering with organizations like yours is going to be the next step after we study this vest a little bit more and make sure that it works in these conditions. And you know, that's a great idea, and we'll be knocking on your door. And in terms of the soccer World Cup, we've started preparing for that. We are actually one of the receiving hospitals, the Level 1 Trauma Center for the Foxborough Games. And Corin, my partner, has been to many meetings in trying to organize the medical response to that, and there may be a role for volunteers in that response.
Thank you.
I can repeat you, Ken, if you just want to chat.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to add a quick comment about an opportunity that is emerging very soon that I think is relevant to your question, because Brown is charged with allocating quite a bit of funding over the next 5 years to workforce development in the state. And so I just wanted all the researchers in the room, but also the community partners, to begin to think about how these partnerships could really benefit and fuel and inspire some really great ideas to take advantage of that funding to advance resilience efforts, training opportunities, community engagement, partnerships with Brown, because you know this ship is going to be 5 years. And it's a sizable amount of funding, so that's a good reminder.
Yeah, thank you, Kim. Tom's had his hand up for a while.
Thanks. Thank you all. These have been really interesting talks. One thing that struck me, though, was that Slim, you had found a way. Something I've been struggling with is trying to find ways to communicate results beside talks and reports. As Chris pointed out, reports have a way of not bubbling up and also not trickling down so much either. Slim, you had you pointed out that your success was getting some of the findings that you had into protocols that were used by medical and emergency personnel, and I wondered if everybody else had other examples of communication successes that seemed a little unusual, or that I'm looking for ideas, ways to communicate things, and I just wonder if there are things that you've noticed that have worked that I wouldn't think of, and Slim, if you have any. I'm actually directing at the other three people, but if you can think of something beside the protocols, I'd love to hear about that too. Thank you.
I mean, my interactions that have been successes, or at least in my head, have come with government officials in both small island states, but also the so-called partner donor countries. Sure. So the successes I can think of are with political officials in both small island states, but also in some of the partner countries, which would be like the large countries in the Pacific, like New Zealand, Australia. And with government officials and politicians, embarrassment typically works. So I think that Solomon's example, I presented at a conference with the climate change minister from New Zealand, who funded the conference and funded the report and funded all of the so-called work on Solomon Islands preparedness, and showing them that this money that they were crowing about how great it was, that they were caretakers of the Pacific and all this bullshit, was, I don't know what that changed, but it was the only thing someone can say when, these so-called, like, have this caretaker status they claim to the Pacific Islands, and it's embarrassing. It should be embarrassing for them that this is the kind of information they give out, and actually it's not actionable. I can't tell you if that changed New Zealand policy towards the Pacific. I can't tell you if it changed anything, but Chris Bishop was not happy. And yeah, I think that gives a sense of empowerment, I hope, to some of the folks who are trying to fight for better information and better resilience efforts in these places.
Yeah, I can give a sense. I mentioned that we host community workshops, and so I can give maybe a broader sense of what that looks like and the role that that's played in our research. One thing I'll say is that it's been extremely important for us to have the community partners lead messaging and communication around what we're doing, because ultimately they're the ones that are going to have to bear any fallout politically, and then this is something that really allows them to drive strategy of what happens with the results going forward. And so it's a continual part of the conversation, right? How is this going to be communicated? In our grant, we had 10% time for communication staff at the organization as well, right? So that was compensated as well. But so our workshops, so we host workshops we've done this for 2 summers in 3 different communities around the sea. It's a pretty large area and a rural area. We compensate people to show up, provide meals. These are 3 or 4 hour long workshops, so they're pretty intense, extensive. We do some sharing of the results. So here's what we have learned over the past year. Here's what we're doing. Here's the sort of framework we're operating in. Then we have interactive activities that allow us to not just say, well, what do you want us to research, but to have conversations around what are people's experiences, what are the challenges that they're facing. And I think those have been really important for informing community about what's going on, but also making sure that they feel like they have a stake. And then those are the people who show up are often some of the most engaged community members who are then taking this knowledge then into their organizations going forward. And so beyond what I talked about, right, of informing state agencies, this is a way to have a broader sense. We also, through those workshops, we identify community leaders, people who in the media then ask us, oh, can you give us a local resident to talk to about this? That we have names and people who we can then refer to. So beyond those workshops, then we have follow-up workshops online that can be more focused on policy or strategy, or when we have a peer-reviewed paper. We had a community peer review before we published the paper, so gave the paper to read, gave a presentation on what the results were, and then got feedback that we were then able to incorporate into the paper before we sent it out to the journal peer review. So those are a few maybe less conventional ways that we've been sharing the work that we do in ways that have had genuine feedback into the way that we do the work in an ongoing way.
So one more point I'll make is, so Sean Kirby, who is one of the communications directors for the RhiNest project, which is a project spanning all of the all of the educational institutions in Rhode Island, including a visual arts scientist collaborative project called the Visathon, is here as well. So Tom, I hope you take the opportunity to come talk to Sean afterwards and hear about some of those pieces. So yeah, can we have maybe one more question and then it's time to switch to posters?
Thank you, and thank you for the introduction. My question is actually, I think, for Mara and Chris. Have you given any thought, or do you have any ideas maybe for future research or potential applications from the lessons that you're learning from your individual projects like Small Islands and the Salton Sea that you maybe have seen problems locally or regionally that you would want to take those lessons and apply them, here in Rhode Island or close by?
Say yes, and that's been one of the main goals of our Equitable Climate Futures working group, is to both support this work in the Salton Sea, but to work more with local partners here in Rhode Island. And so we have developed projects, collaborations, both with Woonasquatucket River, and then ongoing potential collaborations around the port. as well, of taking similar approaches, similar perspectives, and doing some more work here locally. And so it's been great to have Equitable Climate Futures to help seed some of that. I think another maybe sort of unexpected benefit is both Woonasquatucket River Watershed Council, as we heard from Maria Jose, is they're anchoring a resilience center. Alianza is anchoring a resilience center as well. And so we've been able to put the two organizations also into some conversation about doing that work around resilience hubs. And so it's right. The connection is that we're working with both, but it can be informative to have some of these projects that cross boundaries too.
Yeah, I would just add that we are making a collaborative research effort led by Mara to do this, but featuring all four of us and a number of community or partners and other faculty at Brown to build, sort of a machine learning focus to data availability and citing in Rhode Island. So, yeah.
So speaking
thanks,
of,
Chris.
I was going to say, so speaking of community partners, I wanted to take the opportunity to introduce Jenny Mercado and Maria Jose, who are here from the WRWC, and then is Deanne Guo here from the maybe
Not yet.
not yet. Okay, but there will be some other community partners joining throughout the day. So I'd hope that everyone takes the opportunity as we're looking at some of the science that's going on and the posters related to ECF and having conversations, having beverages, having snacks over the next half hour or so before we can reconvene for the second panel. Please talk, introduce yourselves, find out what's going on around, and find out why everyone's here. Thank you very much, and thank you to the panelists for an excellent start to the day.